Hi, my name is Ian Hesketh and I'm the International Missions Director for Elim UK. Over the years, we've sent hundreds of missionaries across the globe to make much of Jesus. And in the days that lie ahead, we are going to be seeking to equip hundreds of more missionaries to train thousands of disciple makers to reach millions of people until there's nowhere left to go. We want to plant multiplying gospel communities in every nation until Jesus is made famous and as many as possible can encounter him with the good news. So why don't you join us?
Hi, I'm Lainey. I'm a missionary in Hungary along with my husband Roy. We've been married for 30 years and have been on the field for 13. But over the last 26 years, we've actually been working in the area of relationships. First of all with marriages, then that extended to parenting, and then it extended to working with singles. And it's been a real joy to actually work in this field and to encourage people, to help them navigate relationships, to help them learn how to do life well. So it's a privilege to be based here in Hungary and be able to reach out from here to many of the nations around us and to minister throughout Europe. So we're really looking forward to what God's going to do in the future. We've been able to utilize things like video, Skype, Messenger, all sorts of different ways to reach people already, but we just have that sense that in a season that God's calling us to new things, to try new things. So here I am in front of the camera, and hopefully you will be encouraged as today I share from Acts chapter 27. This chapter is a chapter that's full of detail. It's actually crammed full of detail. And the first part of the chapter is to do with Paul's journey to Rome. He's not on a pleasure cruise. He's not sitting there, sunning himself along the way, but he's actually being taken to Rome as prisoner. He's not a convicted prisoner yet. He is in that stage of awaiting trial, but he knows that he's got this long and difficult journey to make. Long and difficult, I'm sure, from two perspectives. One is for him personally, as he comes to terms with being a prisoner, and secondly, just the hardships that they had to endure on the ship. So you'll see a few things in this first part of the chapter, and I just want to talk about two things that stood out to me. One is the number of times that the word difficult was used, and the other one is that there seemed to be this sense that the winds were against them. And looking into that a little bit more in terms of, navigation terms, in what it would mean for a sailor, that would mean that it was really, really hard work to make any progress. And I was thinking, a lot of us have, can relate to that. It's not something that is unique to go through tough times. But what I do see is that that first part was difficult enough. And then when you come to the next part of the chapter, it gets even tougher. And really, that's where I want to concentrate my focus today as we look at the scriptures. So we're picking up at verse 13, where it's talking about Paul setting off. They're setting off from a position where they were sort of safe, but it wasn't a great place to spend the winter. They knew that it wasn't going to be great conditions and certainly wasn't the ideal location. And against Paul's advice, but the pilot of the ship had said, yeah, look, we need to go. And he was probably thinking, we've only got 40 miles to go to get to the next destination. We can do this. And the wind seemed to change, and they took advantage of that and they set off. But almost as soon as they'd set off, the conditions changed and a storm blew up called a northeaster, which apparently is something a little bit like a cyclone or a hurricane. And my only experience of a real storm at sea, I mean, I've been on choppy water before, but this was horrible, was setting off. It was travelling from Scotland over to Northern Ireland. I was travelling on my own with our 3 children who were very little at the time, and I remember Ryan looking out of the window and he said, "Wow, Mum, look at those mountains." I looked out the window and they were not mountains, those were waves, but they certainly did look like mountains. And it got so rough that all of the services on board the ship closed down. There was nothing to eat. They stopped serving teas and coffees and all of that type of thing. And actually the staff walked around the ship serving sick bags and water. So it was deeply unpleasant. And I think the journey was around about 4 hours, something like that. It wasn't a horrendously long journey, and yet it felt like it was never going to stop. The storm that Paul was in was 10 times worse than the storm that I was in, and it must have felt like it was not going to stop. In fact, it lasted for 14 days. And in those 14 days, lots of the things that they relied on, they were without. They suddenly couldn't see the stars anymore. They couldn't see the sun. So their navigation system was off. They weren't able to tell what direction that they were going in. And again, as I was thinking, well, what's the relevance to this today? I think there's a lot of relevance actually today, because we don't really know how long the storm that we are in at the moment is going to last. We're all in a pandemic. COVID-19 is rampant, and initially countries have been told you're on lockdown for 2 weeks or you're in lockdown for 3 weeks, and then that just seems to be a never-ending goal because it gets further and further away, and none of us are sure how long this storm is going to last. Some of the things that we've relied on in the past have gone out of the window, and we can't just do our normal thing or go to our normal go-tos. And in fact, in reading this chapter, especially when we come to verse 18, it says, since they were violently storm-tossed, they began the next day to jettison the cargo. And on the third day, they threw the ship's tackle overboard with their own hands. They'd been travelling, they'd done their best to secure the ship, they'd undergirded the ship with ropes, they'd tried to hold it together, it still wasn't working. Then they went to the next stage, which was, well, let's put the anchors down. They put the sea anchor down, so it's not the sort of same as the anchor that they would have had in the harbour, but it was something to try and regain control. So they must have felt completely out of control as they were tossed about on this storm. And again, I thought there's so much of what goes on inside of us that we don't like about going through this situation is we are not in control. There is nothing that we can do other than to give up control to others. And whether that's you, obviously at the moment it's your government, whichever country that you're in, but also we need to really relinquish control to God and say, Lord, you're in control. You know what's happening. You know what direction my life is taking and where I'm going with this. But I'm going to trust you in the middle of the storm. The other thing that they experienced, which many people have experienced already, is the loss of cargo. Now, in our terms, that loss of cargo means loss of income. For many of you, you are in a situation that you didn't expect to find yourself in. You're not able to work. Maybe you've been made redundant over this period of time, or maybe you've just been told, okay, there's not going to be a wage for 3 months, but we'll take you back on when this season is over. But there's still that uncertainty, and everything that you have relied on has been thrown overboard. I just want to encourage you as well that sometimes our perspective needs to change in times like these. I think that really for many of us it has, especially if you've got any loved ones who have contracted COVID-19, and for anyone who unfortunately has experienced loss through COVID-19. Suddenly the things that we thought were important are less important. And as I was reading this, I thought there's so many areas in which there's a sense of comparison that we can see, this is going on. So what I didn't want to do was just focus on what was going on for them, but I wanted to think about what was going on for us and what we can learn not only from the standard members of the crew, but also from Paul and how he handled the situation. Now, what we see on board of that ship was you had obviously the prisoners, you had the sailors, and you had the soldiers. So 3 different groups of people all reacting differently. So the soldiers were in charge of the prisoners. They had to take care of them, look after them, and the sailors obviously were in charge of the ship. But at one point during this desperate struggle, after this 14 nights of horrible weather, the sailors were making plans to get off the ship and to go in a smaller craft and escape. And that's because this bigger ship was just not holding it together. And Paul said something to them. He said to the soldiers, if you let these guys go, we're all lost. And I think that, when we're in a situation like this, everyone's having to pull together, aren't they? We're all having to work together, whether it's by being obedient to the social distancing rules, or whether it's helping people with food. I know that Elim are doing an appeal, and the ERA is there to try and raise funds to help people who just won't be able to make it through this storm if everyone abandons them. So I would encourage you that if you're in a position to help, that you think, what can I do to help others? Not just what can I do to survive, but what can I do to help others? A little bit later we see the reaction of the sailors. And the sailors, when they realised that, they were without hope, that it looked like the ship was going to sink, they also made a decision. They thought, we'll swim for it, we can get away, but let's kill the prisoners, because we shouldn't actually be at risk of losing any of the prisoners, and being accountable for that. And again, this is where the Lord steps in, and you see Julius, who was the centurion, who actually favoured Paul, who thought, this guy is an unusual guy. This guy is somebody who's doing this whole shipwreck or this whole storm thing in a totally different way. And he took the advice and he said, no, we're not going to kill the prisoners. We are going to keep the prisoners. And basically, let's swim for it. And those who can't swim for it, grab hold of some debris, grab hold of some driftwood, and get in the water, and let's try and make it to shore. So in both the cases of the soldiers and the sailors, we have people who are looking out for their self-interests, and they're looking out for their self-preservation. And Paul, he's looking out at the thing in a totally different way. And what he does is he realizes that the secret to getting through this is to know his purpose. And he has a message from the Lord. An angel comes to visit him, and that angel tells him, Paul, don't worry, I've still got a purpose for you. You've still got something to do. You still have to stand before Caesar. So this storm is not going to take you out. You're going to weather that storm, and you're actually going to be able to push through this storm and come to the other side. And I don't know whether for you, maybe you have lost your sense of purpose in this storm. As the navigation has gone overboard, you've been looking for all of the wrong things to give you direction. The direction that you need to find today is in Jesus, because he wants to direct you and to guide you to your future. And that doesn't mean that the winds won't be against you, or that you don't have to go through this storm. But it does mean that we can rely on Jesus, who said, I will never leave you nor forsake you. He's never missing in the middle of a storm. He's always with us. And if we put our trust in him, he will help us to navigate it in such a way that not only will we get through this, but we will be able to help others get through this. So I hope today that this message has spoken to you in some way and has blessed you. And I pray that even as you reflect, and perhaps you'll get a chance to go back through Acts 27 and read it for yourself, but as you reflect, just let the Holy Spirit speak to your heart. Do you have peace? Do you have that sense of assurance in him? Do you know what God is calling you to? What his purpose is for you? Have you got his perspective on this situation rather than the perspective that you did have? Have you allowed him to change your viewpoint? I know that certainly it's challenged me. Well, God bless you, and trust that you will stay safe.